What if death were not the end, but the consummation of all that we seek in life: absolute peace, fearless love, eternal presence? On October 4th, 1582, a woman crossed the veil between two worlds, not with terror, but with the serenity of one who has finally arrived home. Teresa of Avila died as few dare to live, completely dissolved in without resistance, without attachment, without the illusion of control that paralyzes most of us until our last breath. Her death was neither a spiritual accident nor mystical luck. It was the deliberate fulfillment of an inner journey that she mapped with surgical precision in the interior castle. Each dwelling traversed, each fear faced, each night of silent prayer prepared her for that supreme moment. And what she experienced on that threshold reveals something disturbing and liberating at the same time. The highest mystical consciousness is not the privilege of distant saints, but a destiny available to every soul that chooses the path of total surrender. The question Teresa leaves us with is urgent and personal. Are we living in such a way that our death will be a crowning achievement or a desperate escape? In this itinerary, we will delve into the depths of what Teresa experienced in her final moments, not as a historical curiosity, but as a map for our own journey. Because if she could transform anxiety into peace, fear into trust, and death into perfect union, then there is a path we too can follow. Comment below. Do you believe it's possible to live without fear of death? Is your faith in God strong enough to surrender everything, including your last breath? Teresa challenges us to respond not with words, but with our whole lives. The seventh mansion and the moment of death. Teresa's final union with God on October 4th, 1582. Teresa entered her final dwelling place, definitively, not only mystically, but physically. Her death was not a rupture, but a coronation. Everything she taught about the interior castle found its fulfillment in that instant. The soul finally dissolved in without fear, without ego, without separation. It was the moment for which every silent prayer, every night of pain, every surrender had prepared her heart. The seventh mansion is not merely a spiritual start, it is the threshold between time and eternity. Teresa described this place as a union so intimate that the soul is no longer distinguishable from God like water poured into the ocean. Her death revealed that this mystical experience was not abstract. It was the concrete destiny of the human soul. Each breath had become prayer, each heartbeat communion. Neuroscience today suggests that in states of profound contemplative surrender, the ego dissolves. Teresa lived this until her last breath. Reflecting on this sacred moment invites us to ask, are we preparing our souls for this final union? Each moment of inner silence, each gesture of detachment, each act of trust in God is a step towards the dwelling place where the fear of death transforms into a desire for fullness. Teresa teaches us that dying well begins with how we live today. Presence, in love, in total surrender. The death of fear. How Teresa's mystical union overcame the last inner obstacle. Teresa knew fear, intimately fear of condemnation, fear of her own weakness, fear of the visions that assailed her in the early hours of the morning. In the Book of Life, she confesses to having lived for years, tormented by inner doubts, spiritual terror, and anxiety about her eternal destiny. But something transformative happened in the deepest recesses of her being. The fear was not fought, it was dissolved. When the soul touches God in such a real, intimate way, there is no room left for fear, only for the love that expels all shadows. This death of fear is not psychological repression or emotional denial. It is the fruit of the dark night, of the purgative process that burns away every attachment, every illusion of control, every need for external security. Teresa taught that fear is the last obstacle before perfect union. As long as the soul still fears losing something, reputation, comfort, even life itself, it remains fragmented. But when it surrenders everything, when it accepts dying to itself, it discovers that God has always sustained it under His wings. Today, amidst the anxiety and racing thoughts that steal our peace, the Teresian experience calls us to a radical path, not to flee from fear, but to traverse it through silent prayer. Each moment of stillness before God is a small dying, a rehearsal for the great surrender. And in this contemplative training, Something within us is transformed not by willpower, but by the grace that leads us to the dwelling place where terror is converted into absolute trust. When the soul dissolves into light, the final contemplation of Teresa of Avila. Teresa described, God is a light so bright that it eclipses all inner darkness, a luminosity that does not wound the eyes of the soul, but transfigures it. In the seventh mansion, she witnessed this clarity invading every corner of the inner castle, not as an external vision, but as an intimate revelation of who God truly is. Her death was the moment when that light contemplated in life became full reality. The soul no longer observed the light. It dissolved into it, lost its contours, surrendered its separate identity. This mystical phenomena finds surprising parallels in profound human experience. When the ego sheds its defenses, when the mind silences its incessant narratives, something luminous emerges, not fabricated, but discovered. Teresa experienced this radically. Her consciousness expanded until there was no longer Teresa and God, only indistinct union. It was like dying while still alive, but dying to be truly reborn. Every contemplative prayer she practiced was preparation for this moment of total dissolution. We can experience glimpses of this light in our daily lives when we stop, breathe, and withdraw into inner silence. Even for 5 minutes, something within us quiets down. Racing thoughts lose their power, anxiety diminishes, and a subtle sense of loving presence envelops us. Teresa teaches us that this practice is not an escape from reality, but a plunge into the greater reality. And the more we dissolve into the light of God through prayer, the more prepared we will be for the final dissolution she experienced, not as an end, but as fullness. The interior castle as a preparation for dying well. The inner castle that Teresa mapped is not merely mystical geography, it is a roadmap of life and death. Each dwelling traversed represents a necessary detachment, a dissolved layer of fear, a purified emotional bond. Walking through the 7 mansions is learning progressively to let go, first of external things, then of the subtle attachments of the soul, until only God and unified will remain. Those who travel this path learn to die before physical death, and therefore find peace when the final moment arrives. Teresa lived through this process with painful and liberating intensity. Her health crises, her nights of spiritual agony, her constant renunciations, all of this was contemplative preparation. She did not flee from suffering, but transformed it into prayer. Each pain became a portal to greater intimacy with God. Each loss revealed what was eternal. Thus, when her time came, Teresa did not resist. She surrendered as one who returns to a long-awaited home. The interior castle had been her spiritual inn, her training for the final passage. In our daily lives, marked by worries and fears, we can begin this same journey. Each small renunciation of control, of pride, of the need to beride is an entry into a deeper dwelling. Each night of silent prayer, each morning surrendered to God, each moment in which we choose to trust instead of resist. All this prepares us not to flee from death, but to encounter it with the same serenity that Teresa encountered, like one who completes a journey and finally rests in eternal presence. Teresa's final hours, mystical consciousness beyond the self. Historical accounts of Teresa's final days revealed something extraordinary. She died as she had lived in the deepest mansions, in radical peace, without attachment, completely present. Witnesses describe that, even amidst fever and intense physical pain, her consciousness remained serene, turned towards She repeated words from the Song of Songs, whispered prayers of surrender, and her face radiated a stillness that transcended suffering. It was not a denial of pain, but a mystical transformation of it. In that threshold between life and death, Teresa experienced what she had always taught. Perfect union dissolves the separation between self and God. There was no longer a sick Teresa, only a surrendered soul. A luminous consciousness expanded beyond the limits of the body. Her last words were of gratitude and total abandonment. Lord, it is time to depart. May your will be done. This final self-denial was not passive resignation, but a supreme act of love. The woman who had fought so hard against her inner fears now transcended them completely, immersed in the presence she had always sought. This experience challenges us. Is it possible to live each day with this same expanded awareness? Teresa shows us that it is through silent mental prayer, frequent recollection, and the constant practice of presence. Every time we stop to breathe in God, every moment we choose inner peace instead of worry, something transforms. We are, without realizing it, training our soul for that final passage. And the more we live in unity today, the less we will fear dissolution. Tomorrow, for we will have already experienced that in God. We were never truly separate, from pain to peace. Teresa's model of emotional healing through mystical prayer. Teresa carried deep wounds throughout her childhood traumas, identity crises, years of chronic illness that left her paralyzed with pain. Her body suffered constantly, but something even more difficult tormented her. The inner emotional chaos, the feeling of fragmentation, the spiritual anxiety that prevented her from resting. She found no cure in techniques or distractions, but in something far more radical, contemplative silence before God. It was in deep mental prayer that her wounds began to heal, not through her own effort, but through the loving presence that touched her in her most intimate place. This healing process was neither quick nor linear. Teresa went through decades of spiritual dryness, inconsolable nights, periods when it seemed that God was absent, but she persisted in the practice of inner recollection, always returning to the secret garden of her soul, where the water of grace could nourish the parched roots. And gradually, imperceptibly, something transformed. Patterns of emotional reactivity were replaced by stillness. Chronic fear gave way to trust. The need for control dissolved into loving surrender. Contemplative prayer was reconfiguring not only her spirit, but her entire emotional structure. Today, when anxiety paralyzes us, when racing thoughts rob us of sleep, when the emotional weight seems unbearable, Teresa offers us a tried and tested path. She doesn't promise instant relief, but real transformation. Each morning dedicated to silent prayer, each night surrendered into God's hands, each conscious breath in His presence, all this rebuilds our soul from the inside out. The peace Teresa found didn't come from perfect circumstances, but from a heart finally at home, and that inner home is available to us now, in the refuge of the Almighty, where fear no longer has power. Mystical death before physical death. Teresa's teachings on self-annihilation in God. Teresa used a radical expression that frightened her contemporaries: dying to oneself. This wasn't about psychological self-destruction or denial of personality, but something much deeper: the dissolution of the false self constructed by the ego, by fears, by the needs for approval and control. In The Seventh Mansion, she described this phenomenon as mystical death. The soul ceases to operate from itself and begins to live solely in Jodi. It is a luminous paradox. By dying, she found true life. By annihilating herself, she discovered her real identity. This process of self-annihilation does not happen by our own will, but by grace that invites us to total surrender. Teresa taught that it is necessary to let die everything that defines us externally: the image we hold, the expectations we carry, even our spiritual achievements. When the soul finally releases everything, including the need to feel holy, it falls into the luminous void where God dwells. There is no longer mine or I, only the love that always was. This inner death is the greatest act of humility, and Teresa lived it so completely that her physical death became a mere natural continuation. We can begin this path of small deaths in everyday life. Every time we choose not to react to insult, not to defend our image, not to feed the narrative of victim or hero, something of the false self begins to crumble. Every morning when we surrender the entire day to God, releasing the illusion of control, we practice mystical death. And in this constant practice of loving emptying, we discover what Teresa discovered: that true life only begins when we stop trying to build it alone. God awaits us in this place of total surrender, where the fear of death, physical or psychological, finally dissolves into eternal trust. The eternal now. How Teresa experienced time and death in union with God. Teresa described moments of profound prayer in which time simply vanished, hours passed like minutes, or an instant stretched into eternity. This was not a psychological distortion, but a mystical experience of what she called present eternity. In the deepest inner dwellings, the soul touches something that transcends the flow of time, the eternal now of God, where past and future dissolve. In this state, concern about future death loses its meaning. For the soul already inhabits the dimension where death does not exist, only the infinite love that always was and always will be. This realization radically transformed how Teresa lived her final years. She was not merely awaiting death, but was already partially living in eternity. Every daily act, cooking, walking, writing, was performed from this expanded awareness. The fear of finitude faded because she experienced in contemplative prayer that her true nature was eternal in God. She did not need to wait to die to find permanent life. She already touched it in inner silence, in the absolutely surrendered present moment. We can glimpse this state when we completely stop and breathe in the presence of God, when we cease living in the past with regrets or the future with anxieties. When we rest in the now, something opens up. The sense of urgency diminishes, inner peace grows, and for a moment, we touch the eternity that Teresa knew. It is not an escape from temporal reality, but a discovery of the greater reality that sustains it. And the more we practice this contemplative presence, the more naturally we will live as Teresa lived, not fearing death, because we already dwell here and now under the wings of the Eternal, who has never abandoned us. Silence, illness, and grace. Teresa's last teachings from her deathbed. In the final days of her earthly life, Teresa was physically devastated, high fever, intense pain, her body finally giving way after decades of chronic suffering. But her last words and gestures reveal something extraordinary. She did not see the illness as divine punishment, but as the ultimate purification. "Lord, I am a daughter of the Church," she murmured, not as an automatic formula, but as a declaration of total belonging. Her silence between words was more eloquent than any sermon on inhabited silence, where pain was transfigured into a loving offering. Teresa had always taught that suffering, when accepted in union with God, ceases to be destruction and becomes a gateway to grace. On her deathbed, she lived this teaching to the end, not denying the pain, not feigning strength, but surrendering each difficult breath as a prayer. Her Carmelite sisters testified that, even in agony, her face radiated peace, not the peace of one who does not suffer, but of one who suffers in God. This was her last lesson. Full acceptance transforms everything, and contemplative silence is the space where this alchemy happens. When illness, pain, or exhaustion visit us today, we can remember Teresa's example. We don't need to pretend everything is all right, nor repress suffering, but we can choose where to place it. Every time we surrender our pain into God's hands, every sleepless night transformed into a prayerful vigil, every tear offered in silent trust, we are following the path Teresa walked until her last breath. And in this act of surrender, we discover that grace doesn't necessarily remove suffering, but sustains us through it until the final passage is complete and the eternal refuge finally welcomes us. How Teresa's death reveals the fulfillment of the way of perfection. The perfection that Teresa taught in the way of perfection was never rigid morality or the achievement of accumulated virtues. It was something much simpler and more radical. Total love, absolute humility, complete detachment that allows the soul to rest entirely in her death revealed this in a crystal clear way. She did not die as someone who had achieved spiritual goals, but as one who finally let go of everything and fell into the arms of the beloved. Teresian perfection is this ultimate surrender, where nothing remains of the separate self, only the union that has always been the destiny of the soul. Teresa spent decades struggling with her imperfections, confessing her faults, acknowledging her weaknesses. But in the seventh mansion, she understood that true perfection lay not in eliminating defects, but in letting God be everything. Her death confirmed this teaching. She departed without pretensions of personal holiness, only with the gratitude of a daughter returning to the Father. There was no spiritual pride, No fear of judgment, only the confidence of one who lived loving and was loved infinitely. This is the perfection of the gospel, not moral performance, but total loving surrender. Today, amidst our daily struggles and imperfections, Teresa liberates us from an impossible burden. We don't need to be perfect to belong to God. We only need to humbly surrender our imperfection. Every morning we begin by saying, "Into your hands, Lord." Every night we fall asleep under his wings. Every moment we choose to trust instead of control. We are walking the path of Teresian perfection. And when our time comes, as it did for her, we will discover that the entire journey was about returning home where fear dissolves, anxiety ceases, and the soul finally rests in the shelter of the Most High, where it has always belonged. Teresa of Avila left us much more than mystical accounts or spiritual treatises. She gave us a livid map, tested in the fire of suffering and confirmed in the serenity of her death. Everything we explore here is not distant theory, but an urgent invitation. Begin your journey through the inner dwellings today. Don't wait for death to arrive to seek the peace that only God can give. Each morning is an opportunity to surrender the entire day in silent prayer. Each night, a moment to rest under his wings. Each conscious breath, training for the final surrender. Ask yourself this now. Where am I placing my security in? External circumstances or in the refuge of the Almighty? What still prevents me from letting go of control and trusting fully? What fear, anxiety, or worry do I need to surrender to God today? Teresa shows us that true transformation does not come from heroic effort, but from repeated loving surrender, day after day, until the soul finally learns to live and die in peace. Perfection is not the absence of struggle, but constant presence in the one who never abandons us. If this itinerary touched your heart, if something within you awakened to the contemplative journey, don't let that spark go out. Subscribe to this channel and journey with us through the dwellings of the soul, where anxiety ceases, fear dissolves, and hope is reborn. Share in the comments. Which of Teresa's teachings has impacted you the most? In which inner dwelling do you feel you are now? Your faith, when shared, strengthens the entire community. And remember, the path to Teresian perfection begins with a single step, the decision to seek Jodi, not tomorrow, but now, in this present moment. That is the gateway to eternity.